Welcome to What You Need to Know, the summer edition of the Canadian Polycast by Bluesky Strategy Group. We hope that you've all been doing well. My name is Susan Smith, and I'll be moderating the discussion today with my colleagues Tim Barber and Neil Brody. We've had nearly 4 months of COVID-19 restrictions. Summer's now upon us. We've had an economic update by the finance minister, so we thought it was a good time to get together and discuss what does this mean for the government going forward. What should you be thinking about as a business, as an individual, as a company in the future ahead? So let's get to our discussion right away. The first thing I'd like to talk to you folks about, Neil, I'll start with you, is what can people expect over the summer from government? What's government going to be doing this summer?
Well, as we've heard from the discussions we've had with public servants, the business of government continues no matter what time of year it is. Public servants will still be evaluating funding proposals. They'll still be developing new policies and some regulations and laws for the fall. So that work still continues. As far as on the political side, summer is always a time for politicians to get out and meet their constituents and have barbecues and shake hands and listen to what the
not anymore
constituents are saying. Well,
that's right. Socially distanced behind masks, but they'll still be out talking to people and listening.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Tim, do you agree with Neil that this is what government will be up to, and what other kind of thinking do you think government will be doing?
So again, I think that it's an extraordinary time. It's never happened before like this. I don't think this is a summer like we've ever faced, in over 100 years. So I do think that government is also going to be watching their COVID numbers very closely, making sure there's no flare-ups. I think the government's been incredibly pragmatic and a willingness to kind of look at the numbers and what are the issues that come up that need to be addressed. So I think that that's what, I think I completely take Neil's point, which is people will be getting back into their communities. But I think the public service and the senior officials within the government of Canada will be watching the COVID numbers very carefully, and especially south of the border, which continues to be an absolute train wreck.
And from a corporate perspective, that means have we moved into recovery mode? Are we still fighting the fire? Are we somewhere in between? Neil?
I don't think, I think, as Tim said, senior public servants and senior ministers will likely be working, they have been working, and will likely work more over the summer on what a recovery plan will look like. We saw the fiscal snapshot update yesterday. It was very much a retrospective document and an update as to the status of the government's finances to date. And I know that quite a number of Canadians are waiting to see what the plan would be. A couple of provinces have started coming up with their recovery plans. A couple of other countries are starting to come up with their recovery plans. And so without that being announced yesterday, I suspect that the senior public service and senior ministers will be putting the final touches on something that the government can announce September or October if the COVID infection numbers stay relatively stable.
I actually think there's an opportunity for people to still feed into that. I don't think they're on finishing touches yet. I think they're still building what this COVID recovery plan is. So I think for companies that are thinking about what they need, whether it's a regulatory change or investment, or they have a new direction they'd like to point the government in, as long as they can connect it to COVID recovery, and as long as they can connect it to the mandate of the government's existing mandate, I think there's an opportunity for some of that spending to take place.
And I do think there's a need for the government to come up with kind of a framework for decision making going forward as it goes into recovery mode. They're going to have to decide what is the priority sectors. We're not going to be able to do everything. There's still a lot of programs that are in place, so there's a ton of process underway which can be affected. I would argue that more so than ever, the public services working remotely, but still very engaged with stakeholders. I've been amazed with how the Public Service of Canada has not missed a beat, in terms of availability, probably better than ever. And I think that people's vacations are not, going to be the same. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on people to actually remain home. And by the way, where else would they go? So a lot of staycations, which means a lot more availability for stakeholders to get in touch with, whether it's political staff or senior officials in the government of Canada.
We with the update this week from Minister Morneau, we had saw the biggest, it's a record deficit from a Canadian perspective, $343 billion. That's the biggest we've had since the Second World War. You could argue that we're in a different kind of war at the moment, and the economy was going to tank like no way possible. But there has been a lot of spending. The other two numbers that would be interesting to people is the forecast a 6.6% decline in overall growth in the economy for this year. But next year, they're predicting a bit of a rebound, 5.5%. It still doesn't bring us quite up to par. But what kind of role do you think the government is going to have in more spending or injection of money into kickstarting that stimulus? And do you see any particular sectors that there may be investment in?
Well, I think we're not unique in any other OECD country. Everyone's dealing with obviously shrinking revenues, managing a massive increase in unemployment. So my perspective is not only do you have shrinking revenue, I've got a massively increased expenditures. So I think the government's done a very good job in terms of short-term liquidity. I think that, for people who've lost their jobs and for companies who have, had to adjust, and we're still going to see. I don't think that buffet restaurants are going to be coming back anytime soon, and I don't think people will be encouraged to be traveling in airplanes pretty soon, but we'll see. But I think that this is all new, and I do think that the government is looking very closely at what else does it need to do to kind of tweak the system here and there. Their Keynesian orientation, I think they're trying to hold some semblance of the economy together. So when we do come out of this, hopefully there isn't a second wave in the fall and into the winter, because that would be catastrophic.
Neil, given your internal experience in government, I mean, you've sat in a chief of staff's chair in a different administration. From a program development, policy spending perspective, do you anticipate that the government is going to try and essentially push more money into programs that have already been designed and just boost them out that capacity because that's faster, or do you think they'll be coming up with new programs?
Well, there's a certain speed attached to putting more money or recapitalizing existing programs. Terms and conditions are already written. The public service who evaluates submissions to those programs are already well acquainted with how the programs work. We've seen over the last 4 months, the government's done as good a job as any government could do of starting up brand new programs starting in late March, early April, and getting the money as quickly as possible. But there were some hiccups along the way of starting up a brand new program and pushing it out as quickly as was needed. So I think the government will likely lean towards recapitalizing the existing programs. But as you said, Susan, earlier today, I agree with you that the government's still likely probably looking for suggestions on to how to push out stimulus funding or whatever you want to call it over the next 12 to 18 months. So I don't think it's too late to help shape the discussion going forward. But as far as an operational perspective, recapitalizing existing programs and getting the money out that way is by far the fastest way.
And let's talk about some of the departments that might flow through, right? There's obviously Infrastructure Canada, where some of the money still hasn't gone out the door yet. And there's been some fluidity between the provinces, or the indication from the feds that the terms and conditions for the provincial things are going to stretch. They're going to be a little bit elastic, so there can be a reallocation of funding there. Department of Canadian Heritage did a second tranche of funding to arts and culture organizations, but they haven't tackled the sports sector yet, for example. And there's been lots in the news about how different segments, whether it's tennis or football or hockey, have been potentially hit by that. What else? Where else do you expect some spending? Tim, perhaps, what about on the environment or the natural resources file? Are there any other sectors that you could see some of that coming out through the door?
Yeah, again, I think there's some gaps in individual departments, and I think on LEAF, which is the large employer program, there's been a lot of difficulties with companies being willing or able and willing to meet the terms and conditions. So there might be some adjustment on that. Again, what we've been counseling our clients to do is if you don't apply, you can't negotiate. So you have to get into the process. that is a brand new program. The terms and conditions are incredibly stringent. So, it's a $50 billion program that no one's had access to yet. So to me, good on you, Public Service of Canada, that you've made it difficult to take advantage of. But if it's there to help Canadian companies survive through a very difficult time, you have to be willing to be a little flexible. So I think that the next few months are going to be a time where you can adjust. In terms of specific departments, I think the environment's obviously one, Natural Resources Canada and our resource sectors, agriculture. I think tourism and regional development are going to be, the benefits of the recapitalization that Neil referenced earlier.
One thing also to keep in mind is the partnerships with the provinces for infrastructure, for heritage, to a certain degree, environment. A lot of part of the terms and conditions for some of the programs are, and you must have a willing partner at the provincial level for your project as well. So you can't discount the provinces in this. If you're looking for money from the federal level, you'll likely need match or similar funds from the provincial level as well.
Mm-hmm. And the gas tax is floated to the municipalities in a single tranche this year instead of a second in 2 tranches. And that gives a little bit of additional flexibility too. It allows the feds and the province and the feds and the municipalities to work together directly. So I think that could be some opportunities for people who are looking to get something moving. Those cities are broke. There's a reason the money went.
And so are provinces.
They've had incredible challenges financially too, trying to manage their own workforces and the support that they've had to give people.
So Susan, but that's why I think a third might not work in some cases.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is, the provinces are desperate for cash, and they have their priorities. And by the way, the one thing we haven't touched on is, COVID exposed a number of huge problems, societal problems, especially around long-term care and public health. So I do think those are going to be massively recapitalized. But then, they're already, Neil, help me here, 50% of most provincial budgets are focused on healthcare.
Yeah.
So, in a situation where you've already downloaded to the provinces through the 1995 financial kind of reset and rebalancing of the federal provincial relationship there. And, they have no money and they have very little tax revenue. So I think that's something that we're going to have to address at some point.
Right. And the other thing that typically at this time of year, people are working on their pre-budget submissions. The finance committee is accepting them. We're seeing that. It'll be a slightly different pre-budget consultation. I think we're all, zoomed and teamed in to what's going on. We haven't had a budget this year because of the disruption. Do we think the budget will come early? Or do we still think a budget will be into the beginning of 2021 on a typical budget cycle? And or do you think stimulus money will flow sooner than that? Neil, what do you think?
I think the government has set themselves up to return to again, if there's not a second spike, the government set themselves of COVID-19. This government set themselves for a return to the regular fiscal schedule, which is a fiscal update this fall and then a budget in early 2021. A lot will depend on whether there's a second spike in COVID. A lot will depend on what the books look like in September or October, which calendar-wise is not a long way away, but in expenditure-wise, that's a long way away. Whether there will be stimulus funding flowing by the fall. I believe that there'll be an appetite on the demand side, and usually when the demand side starts asking for something, the supply side, that is the government, responds quite quickly to the population.
Great. Tim, any thoughts on that in terms of when the money will flow?
Sooner, well, to your original question, I still think it'll be a fall update and a early New Year budget.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason that the fall update couldn't be more robust. Like, I think we just have to get over ourselves here. I mean, like, it's kind of a new environment that we're all working in, and I think people are incredibly patient and willing to kind of go along with things. The other thing that we haven't talked about is you're going to have a new conservative leader in August. So kind of the environment, the political environment is going to change a bit as well. So I don't know, will the opposition be tempted to push the Liberal government into an election? I don't know. So we'll see.
Well,
I think you just hit on a topic for the next podcast, Tim.
Will the government want to push itself into an election?
No, and that is definitely another conversation. So if you're going to sum up, maybe I'll sum up what you guys have said, and I think the direction we're going. If you're a business or an organization that's looking to deal with government, is looking to activate, or a province or a city even, and you're looking to activate or action or access federal money, get your ask in now, get it identified, and make sure it's part of the system in terms of the COVID recovery for the country. Fair sum up? Great.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Great.
Don't buy a ticket, you can win the lottery.
So Tim Barber, Neil Brody, thanks very much for joining us today on What You Need to Know, a Canadian podcast. Thanks to our listeners for joining the three of us here from Bluesky Strategy Group. Stay healthy, stay well, and enjoy the balance of your summer. Maybe we'll come back and talk a little bit politics down the road. Thanks very much. Bluesky Strategy Group is one of Canada's leading public affairs firms. For government relations, lobbying, and strategic communications advice across Canada, visit us at blueskystrategygroup.com. Bluesky Strategy Group is a proud member of the Global Communications Alliance.